Hello, hello, hello. I'm Marshall Goldsmith. Welcome to the 100 Coaches Show. We have a wonderful show today with two fantastic guests. And today we're going to talk about emerging as a leader and truth to power. And we have two really brilliant young people who are going to be talking with us today on these topics. Let me introduce myself. I'm Marshall. I'm from a small town called Valley Station, Kentucky. I went to school in Indiana. I got a PhD at UCLA. I was a college professor and dean when I was very, very young. And then I guess for the last 43 years, I travel around the world giving talks and teaching classes. I've been to 102 countries. I write and edit books and articles. I've written or edited 42 books and 6 bestsellers. And then I've been most famous for coaching executives. I've been the coach of the CEO of Ford, Pfizer, Glaxo, Walmart, the World Bank, the Mayo Clinic, on and on and on. And what I learned about coaching is where I love so. Coaching is where I learn so much. I learned so much from my clients, and we've got a wonderful program called 100 Coaches. And what we're doing is it's all a give back program. Pay it forward. Everybody gives whatever they know to everybody else, and the only price is when you get older, you give it to other people. So it's just been a wonderful idea. And one of our wonderful 100 Coaches people, Eddie Turner, is joining us today with Megan Reitz, a wonderful person who's an expert in the area of truth to power. Very big topic today. And that's our title, Emerging as a Leader in Truth to Power. Now, let me introduce our two guests. We have one guest is Eddie Turner. Eddie is a great coach. He is a facilitator. He's got the Emerging Leader podcast. He's a member of our 100 Coaches. Welcome, Eddie.
Thank you, Marshall. What a pleasure to be here today.
And our second guest is Megan Reitz. Megan, I visited in England. We had a fun time together. We went to a Buddhist monastery, got to traipse around a little bit. And she is at Ashridge, and she's at the Holt Graduate School. She is a professor of leadership and dialogue, which I love that title. I think you may be the only professor in the world of leadership and dialogue. So I love your job title there. She's an author of a wonderful new book called Speak Up, and she's on the Thinkers 50 radar. Now, Thinkers 50 is our partner in these fine podcasts. Thinkers 50 radar. The Thinkers 50 is the world's top organizations for rating and evaluating management thoughts. I mean, she's one of the top 30 people in the world, which is top 30 young people, which is a very big deal. Now, Megan, I'm in the Thinkers 50 too, but I'm in the Hall of Fame. See, I'm at the opposite end. She's where they put the young people. I'm where they put the old people. So, and then one day, Megan, you get old. You see, if you're lucky, you get to be in the Hall of Fame, where they put all the old folks over there. So, welcome, Megan.
Lovely to be here. Thank you, Marshall.
Now, Megan, one of the things you're talking about is truth to power. Everybody says they want that. We want people to tell the truth, express their opinions, but somehow it doesn't happen so much. Why do people stay silent?
So it's a hot topic, isn't it, at the moment inside organizations, trying to help people speak up more. Now, the interesting thing is that you and I and everybody that's listening makes choices every day around whether to speak up or stay silent. And some of those choices end up being habits. So we each have our own habits around what we say and what we don't say. And also habits around what our teams say and what they don't say. And these habits have huge consequences. So first of all, some of the consequences can be around ourselves and our careers, and also consequences on our relationships. But in teams and organizations, those consequences can actually even cost lives. So they matter. And why do we stay silent? Well, one thing that we've uncovered in our research is that, unfortunately, many leaders tend to sort of point at employees and say, we want you to speak up, have courage, be brave. But actually, there are very good reasons why people stay silent. And usually it's out of fear and perceived risks. And so what my research shows is that one reason why we stay silent is because of the organizational culture and the leaders and the people that are perceived in positions of power. And something that we've got to do is really enable them to skillfully invite other people to speak up. And that's a very hot topic at the moment, especially.
Yeah, one reason we stay silent is people get rewarded for sucking up and punished for telling the truth.
And we know one of the most interesting questions that we ask in our research inside organizations, we kind of sidle up to people and say, what happens when you speak up round here? And it's a fabulous question. And if you're a leader listening to this particular program, you want to be able to know what people say to that question. And the problem is a lot of leaders are in a little bit of a bubble and they think that they're fairly optimistic about it. They think people are speaking up, but actually they're not. And that's one of the problems that we address.
See, I think also a lot of this might be unconscious because everyone says they don't want suck-ups. Everyone says they want people to tell the truth, but we don't reinforce that. Eddie or Megan, have either of you owned a dog before? A dog?
Yes.
No? Eddie, you have owned a dog.
Have either? I didn't catch them.
Eddie, what was your dog's name? Do you still have a dog?
I do. She's the cutest Shih Tzu in the world. Her name is Leah.
Leah. Now, Eddie, I have a question for you, Eddie. Would you agree, Eddie, that encouraging suck-ups is a bad thing? Would you agree with that, Eddie?
Oh, boy, I see where this is going. Yes, Marcia, I agree.
And Eddie, who gets the most unqualified positive recognition in your family? Would that be the wife, the kids, the partner, or maybe the dog? Who gets the most unqualified positive recognition?
Oh, my goodness, Marcia, you're going to have me in trouble when this interview is over. it's probably going to be Leah.
Of course. Now, everybody that owns a dog, I say, who gets the most unqualified positive recognition in your house? 80% of the cases, the answer is the dog. Then I say, well, why does the dog get all the recognition? Well, they don't talk back. They're happy to see you. You come home late, they're still happy to see you. Come home late and drunk, they don't care. They're happy anyway. Well, that's the way we don't realize this, but we all reinforce people that reinforce us. Now, Megan, I love what you're doing. What are some of the consequences of this, people staying silent?
Well, the consequences, I mean, a lot of people are talking right now in this crisis about the need for agility. I think we've been talking about that for years, but now it really means something. Agility, innovation, and also ethical working inside organizations. And so part of what the consequences are of silence is that it means that we're not voicing ideas that would enable us to adapt in our environment in terms of organizations. And it also means that we may not be voicing and challenging ways of working. And we've seen in the newspapers recently that organizations end up on the front page of the newspapers for all the wrong reasons sometimes. There's something going on inside the organization which doesn't get voiced as it needs to. I think I'd add another two things here that have especially come out of the current crisis and have a lot to do with our conversational habits. One is compassion, and we've heard a lot more, thank goodness, about compassionate leadership and our capacity to really know and understand some of the context of the people that we're working with. We can't do that unless we enable a certain change in the way that we speak up. And also we're hearing a lot more about purpose of organizations. And again, I think the crisis has shown many organizational and leader true colors around purpose. What do you say matters? What matters to your employees? And again, the consequences of silence mean that we don't understand purpose. it doesn't mean anything. It's not coming across as authentic. So those two are also big in the news right now because of the crisis. So consequences are that we're hearing some voices and not others. And frankly, if we want to create any form of difference in our future, all this talk about reimagining the future, we're not going to change anything in ourselves or our culture unless we change conversational habits, unless different people get to say different things and are heard in different ways. And that's also very much on the news right now in terms of Black Lives Matter as well. So how do we really hear and engage with voices that actually in the past have been silenced? This has big consequences on individuals and organizations.
Very good, very good. Now, Eddie, you've been spending time dealing on the topic of emerging leaders. Give us some insights on that. What do you mean by emerging leaders, and what suggestions do you have for them?
Well, Marshall, if you asked the average person in human resources or in an organization, what's an emerging leader? They're going to say a high potential employee, that employee who has been identified as someone we should fast track in the organization. They're going to be a senior leader at some other point. Other times people talk about an emerging leader and they're talking about someone who is newly promoted or early in their career. What I've been challenging leaders to think about when it comes to emerging leader is to think of it in the context of how Merriam-Webster defines it in the dictionary. And that is that to emerge means to become known as or to come into view. And by that definition, we can expand our lens of what it means to be an emerging leader. So I'm not looking at just early people in their career or that high potential person. By that definition, I'm asking leaders to look at those who are senior leaders, who are executive leaders, who say, no, I'm not emerging, I'm not new. But we need to become known as a leader in a new way. We need to come into view in a new way. Megan nicely highlighted how her work ties into our current crises. And I would say something very similar. When we look at how we've had governors, we've had mayors across the United States, they're already leaders, leading people in a fine way. But we've seen them emerge or become known as a leader in new ways during this crisis.
Very good. Megan, lots of applause for everybody. Hey. Okay, let's have you guys talk with each other. We'll start with Eddie asking a question to Megan. What's a good question you have for her?
Well, I will start off even before a question with a statement. When I saw that she has the title Professor of Leadership and Dialogue, I was impressed, Megan, because not only are you an expert on leadership, but you know how to talk about it. So what a cool title. I love that. As it relates to speaking truth to power, wow. I mean, that is coming up so much in conversations here at every level, be it we're talking about the COVID crisis here in the United States, or we're talking about what's happening in terms of the protests in the streets. It seems like in far too many cases, we just don't have enough people willing to do that who actually have the job of doing it. What's just one step people can take if they find themselves reticent to speak up and give that truth to power?
Yeah, that's a good idea. What's a good way to do it?
I will answer the question in terms of speaking up, but I think most of my research sort of turns that on its head a little bit, and it says, actually, can we just lessen our tendency to ask other people to have courage? Now, that is really important, don't get me wrong. So all the work on having bravery and courage to speak up is phenomenally important. It's just that most of the organizations I work with spend all of their time and resources on trying to make people brave and speak up and teach them how to do that, when actually what they need to do is spend far more time focused on how do we listen and create the kind of environment where it wouldn't need so much bravery in the first place to speak up. So in terms of your speaking up, I think, part of my research does show three kind of traps that people often fall into. One is that, there's many more traps, by the way, that three I'll briefly mention. One is the imposter voice that we have in our mind, that you'll both be familiar with, working as coaches as you do and as I do. Sometimes we have a little voice of inner critic in our head that stops us speaking up about things and kind of prepares us for the worst. And we need to engage with that voice. And I must say that out of the hundreds of interviews that I've conducted, I have conducted a few with leaders that could do with a little bit more imposter voice. They could do with a little bit more doubt about their opinions. But most people need to be helped to understand that little voice and actually engage with it and try and practice and extend their comfort zone there. Another trap is that we abdicate. We kind of want to speak up, but we think, okay, somebody else will do it for me. And that's an assumption. Again, we need to spot it in our mind. A lot of my research is on mindfulness. So when that assumption crops up in your head and says, not my job, somebody else will do it, we need to really pause and say, no, hang on a second. Is this something where I actually need to take responsibility and step up here? And the final trap that I'll say that crops up a lot is when we do speak up, we speak up in a way that suits ourselves rather than the other person. So particularly with things where we need a lot of courage and we've got a lot of adrenaline going on, we're busy kind of going, okay, I'll say it. And actually what we need to do is spend more time thinking about how will that person hear me best? What's on their agenda? What matters to them? When and where should I speak up so I can be heard? So that's just three of the many kind of bits of advice that I could give in terms of speaking up. But as I said, actually what we're looking for in our research is helping leaders to make it a place where not so much bravery is needed in the first place.
Big start.
Yeah. What's a good question? What's a good one for Eddie?
So I've got loads that I could ask you here. One thing I suppose is, I've got two and I don't know which one. I'll ask this one first. It's interesting how we construct leadership, isn't it? How we spot who is a leader and who isn't. And it strikes me that some of what we need to do is to change the stories around who we regard as leaders and why. And actually, many times we equate leaders with the people at the top of the organization. And that's a kind of emancipated version of leadership. And so my question for you is how do you deal with who counts as a leader? And what are the capacities that you see as emerging leaders, I suppose?
Well, that's a good question. Thank you, Megan. I think I'd start off with something Jim Kouzes said. He's the co-author of The Leadership Challenge. And Jim Kouzes, in his book with Barry Posner, says that only 1 in a million people do not have any leadership capacity whatsoever. He says everybody has some. So the notion that only a select few people can lead is the first thing that we must challenge, to your point. That's been part of the problem for a long time. If a person was a certain race, if they were a certain gender, we felt maybe that person could not be a leader and they were not given the opportunity. That is no longer the case. And so if we start with the premise that anyone has the capacity, then we can look at building the capacity of those individuals as leaders. And oftentimes those leaders are able to emerge when given an opportunity. And they emerge most often, according to the work of Dr. Ron Heifetz at Harvard's Kennedy School, through the power of influence. And this is where, even if they don't have a leadership title, they are able to use persuasion, soft skills to influence and make a difference. And then by separating the idea of influence from authority, using their influence, they're eventually given a position of authority where they can affect even greater change as a leader.
You know, Megan and Eddie, in different ways, I think both of you could be intimidating to talk to.
You know what? It's a really interesting one. In fact, we wrote one of the last articles we wrote for Harvard Business Review was called "Managers, You're More Intimidating Than You Think." And absolutely, so we apply titles and labels to one another, and they do include race and gender and job title and things like professor. Now, professor, the interesting thing about titles and labels is it depends on your context, what status and authority they convey and the stories around them. And I work in some places where professor means, frankly, absolutely nothing whatsoever. And in other places where professor is seriously intimidating. So one of the things we need to do as a leader, but anybody inside organizations, we need to understand what titles and labels do we give ourselves and others, and how does that affect voice, our own and other people, and what work do we need to do to enable other people to open up. And we're so blind of how intimidating we are. So it's a really good point, Marshall.
Very good. Like Eddie. Okay,
I laugh,
Eddie,
Marshall, because I've never heard that. How could I be intimidating?
Okay, Eddie, very easy. I look in the back. What's that little diploma say? Northwestern, right? Is that what it says?
Yes, sir. That's it. You have great eyes. That's what it says. Yes, sir.
I had glasses, but I did see it. I did see it, right? And highly educated, African-American guy, very articulate. I'm somebody else. I'm going to express opinion. I'm afraid I'm going to look like an idiot, say something wrong, embarrass myself. This smart guy is just going to crucify me. Am I missing a point here?
No, that's absolutely it. And one of the biggest things that I work on with leaders is to help them realize how scary they are, even if they're not, in the sense that they have a positive intent, that they are genuinely approachable. They will have titles and labels that will mean that others find them intimidating, and they can't even do anything about some of those. So they have to have this kind of like ability to see themselves as others do. And that's one of the hardest things. I find it really hard because similarly, Eddie, I find myself going, me? Intimidating? No way. But.
And,
so it's interesting, Marshall.
Go ahead, Eddie.
Yeah, I think that I've spent a lot of years working on emotional intelligence. So when I think about the aspect of self-awareness, the aspect of empathy, I think I've tried to always create an environment where I would be approachable and that I'm aware of not only how I am dealing with other people, but the signals that perhaps I'm giving off. And so it is a great point you're making that I've not really considered up until this point, but always I think every leader needs to have a high level of self-awareness, and our success is really tied to that, because if we're not self-aware of how we're coming across to other people or those perceptions that people are maybe creating through either unconscious bias, as you referred to earlier, or conscious bias, it can be a derailer.
Well, and it could be bias in either way. Like in Megan's case, she has a Brit accent. The average American thinks anyone with a Brit accent, their IQ is 15 points higher. I mean, I've been there many times.
Yes.
There are many idiots that live there that have Brit accents, but to the average American, they have this statistical, stereotypical view. And a professor with a Brit accent, oh my God! I mean, I can't say anything around them. You know, they've got to be incredibly intelligent.
I'm loving listening to her far more than me.
Yeah, well, okay, Eddie, you know me, and Megan, you know me a little bit. I'm the nicest guy in the world. Yet, could I be intimidating to people?
Well, you're the great Marshall Goldsmith.
Okay, no. Okay, Eddie, you go for it. How can I be intimidating without meaning to, without wanting to?
You're the great Marshall Goldsmith, right? You're the person most people have only seen on a television screen. They've only read your books. They've seen you in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and on and on and on. I remember the first time I went up to you, I was afraid. But you're the nicest guy.
But see, that's a key point I think Megan is making for all of us. Eddie, for you, and for me, and for Megan, for all of us, is that we all can be intimidated in different ways. And although our hearts may be good, then we project ourselves onto others and say, well, I don't mean to be intimidating, therefore I'm not. Well, okay, that's not necessarily true. You know, Eddie, you don't mean to be intimidating. Megan, you don't mean to be intimidating. I don't mean to be intimidating. That doesn't mean we're not intimidating. That just means we don't mean to be intimidating, because we're projecting ourselves onto that other person. And the other person may have fears that we're unaware of, that fears we consider to be irrational or wrong, but it doesn't matter. They're still their fears. So this is a great conversation. Let's wrap up with, give me just one quick suggestion for younger leaders. I know you're talking about emerging leaders, Eddie, at all levels, but just keeping on the theme of this talk, how can younger leaders do a great job of expressing their opinion, yet doing it in a way that makes a difference? Peter Drucker said, we're here on earth not to prove we're right, we're here to make a positive difference. So Eddie, what's a way that younger leaders can express that opinion, yet do it in a way that's designed to really help them make a positive difference? Then Megan, I'll ask you the same question. Start with Eddie.
How we express ourselves is an indicator of who we really are and what we think. And so it's absolutely important that, especially today, leaders of all ages, especially emerging leaders, are called upon to be clear, to be forthright, to be intentional in their delivery. And that also necessitates at times taking into consideration social norms about what that means and what we're expressing. But at times they're also being called upon now to challenge those social norms. So I think each person has to find their voice and exercise it in the way that they see fit. And as I say on the podcast, keep leading.
Keep leading. Megan, what's your advice for younger leaders who want to do a good job of expressing themselves, yet want to do it in a way that's going to make a difference, not just prove they're right?
I think the two things that come as absolutely, foundations. One, and I would say this because a lot of my research is in this area. One is mindfulness. So our capacity essentially to be self-aware in the present moment, understanding our biases, our assumptions, our responses, our body language. That is really, really valuable in order to speak up and speak up well. And the second thing I would say is what counts for anybody, no matter where they are in their careers, actually, is having people around you that can support you, but also give you some really fantastic direct feedback, which can be quite challenging. And the more senior you are, the more difficult it is for anybody to give you feedback that's genuine. And so one thing you have to make sure that you do as you emerge as a leader, but then as you continue on in your career, is really ask yourself, who have I got around that is going to tell me how things are and that's going to tell me and challenge me and give me some feedback? Because that's one of my most scarce resources, the more intimidating I get.
Yes, and the higher up you go, the more true this becomes.
Absolutely.
Now, finally,
yes.
Finally, let me just say it's my honor to work here with you, Eddie. You're a great guy. I love what you're doing. You've got a wonderful spirit of life. Megan, it's my honor to work with you. I remember you now from our previous visit. I had so much fun. She's such a nice host to me, very kind to taking me around, give me a little tour. So we're very, very positive. And Megan, I love what you're saying about mindfulness. I am a Buddhist, and I've only found one challenge with myself for being mindful, and that is I forget.
The irony.
I would be mindful, but the only thing that inhibits my mindfulness is my forgetfulness.
It's like that comment that I hear a lot, which is I'm too busy to be mindful as well. That's the other thing that I hear quite a lot is I'm too busy.
I'm too forgetful. So Eddie, it's my honor to work with you. Thank you so much, Eddie, and thank you for being part of our wonderful club. Eddie, I think we should invite Megan to join our fine club. What do you think?
I think we should, sir.
It would be an honor.
You should join.
Say that again, Marshall.
I remember if you're not already a member, hell, you might already be a member. I forget these things. But if you're not already a member, you should definitely join our club. Would you agree, Eddie?
Absolutely. Megan should be one of the 100 coaches.
I vote for Megan. What do you think, Eddie? You voting for Megan?
I'm voting for Megan.
I think we have enough.
Thank you both. That's very kind.
So, Eddie, and thank you, Megan. It's such an honor to be with both of you. It's so much fun. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you. Lovely to be on. Thank you.
Bye-bye.